Today we're going to be replacing the rear trunk struts on the Civic. Currently, the struts are too weak to hold the door up anymore. I hold it with my hand and it just drops all the way down. So we're going to replace it with some new ones. So a particular issue of my trunk strut is this bolt and nut right here is not attached to the chassis frame anymore. As you can see, it just kind of shakes around a little bit. When we come to the other side, this guy is attached to the chassis as it should be. So I'm a little bit concerned at how that's gonna go, but I'm gonna take the nut off on the top and on the bottom. You can see here all the grease is pretty much sputtered out on both ends, and so they are in need of replacing. So get a 12mm wrench and start loosening the top bolt. Okay, as always, we always run into problems. First problem, all of the videos that I've seen of people taking out the trunk struts, for some reason, they don't have this trim piece here. One video I saw, the guy had the car all stripped out, so obviously it was all bare metal. Another person had some trim pieces except for this guy here. The reason why this guy's an issue is because I can't get my wrench to fit the nut into the socket. So I think what I'm going to have to do is I need to go on the inside. Too dark. I need to go on the inside and take out the trim pieces so I can get access to the rear. So, plan of attack. Take off the 3 hex bolts holding in the speaker pod. Then remove the trim piece closest to the bottom of the trunk strut end. To do that, they are 3 10mm bolts that you need to remove. I also want to point out that all this grease from the strut is leaking inside of the trunk. You can see it gets all the way down there, so this definitely needs a cleanup. Once you remove the 3 bolts, the speaker pod should be able to hang slightly, still attached to the seatbelt. From there, you have access to the interior trim piece that's blocking the trunk strut bolt. To do that, you need to remove this plastic pin. You can use a flathead trim removal tool. I'm going to try to use a flathead and a set of pliers to pull that off. Once you take off the pin, it will start to droop like this. Then you can pry it out, and then it has a little slit right here. So then you can take it out. Once removed, now you have more access to get your 12mm wrench and take out the bottom trunk strut bolt. Here's the strut that I got off of Amazon. We're going to be installing these guys to replace the old ones. Now, open up your new struts and compare with the old struts. This is the new one. This is the old one. The old one, all the grease leaked out of the strut. This one is all nice and complete. It should last us a long time. So we'll install the new one in reverse order. When you install the strut, just make sure you have it in the right orientation than when you remove the original strut. So for example, the bare metal part should be on the bottom, and the tube / canister part, or the hydraulic part, should be on the top. I got the first trunk strut on, and just as I'm trying to install the trim piece back, I realized the cover, or I should say the little plastic boot that covers the end of the trunk strut, is too big to slide the trim back on. And I'm starting to realize why some people just leave the trunk of the Civic exposed like this. It's because they realize with these aftermarket struts especially that have these large boot ends that they can't put the trim over it. So a solution to this is, we go on the other side, is you can actually pop out the bolt of the new trunk strut. You can pop out the bolt. Where's the new one? You can pop out the bolt of the new trunk strut by prying out, if it can focus, by prying out the collar that holds it. Right there, you kind of see like the collar that's holding the pin. You can take that out. So put it in first, then install the trim piece back on. Okay, so once you have the bolt screwed into the chassis all the way, then you can take your trim piece, slide it in the way that it was originally was. Make sure all the tabs are in place. Then then you can push it in and snap it into place. Once you have the trim piece installed with the bolt end exposed, then you can pop the trunk strut end back onto the bolt. So adjust it over, and then take the collar that you have down here, push it up, locks into place. Yeah. Now you can have the trim piece, and you can have the boot cover end both on the trunk. Hey guys, Future Lance here. Basically, a couple of weeks have gone by since I last touched the Honda Civic trunk, and that was because I was taking summer classes and that took up a lot of my time. But also I was stuck on the problem where that one hole that didn't have threads anymore couldn't hold in the strut. I was trying to find ways to see if I could put some threads in to the trunk. My first method was to use these little jack nuts. Basically, it's like a threaded insert where you put it in the hole, and then as you tighten, the wings fold out, and then supposedly it could sandwich itself inside the trunk cavity. I did some beta testing with them, and then ultimately I didn't feel confident that they could actually hold up the strut, because one, when the trunk is closed, the trunk strut is going to be pressurized, and so it's going to start putting some shear force on the jack nut, and I was afraid that was going to spin out. Then another way I was thinking of trying to connect the strut to the trunk was to use rib nuts, but again, same situation. I was concerned that if I didn't compress it down enough, it might start spinning out, and I gotta drill it out again. And plus, trunk line has some body lines, so if the rib nut doesn't seat flush with the surface, then it won't make a good mating surface, and so it won't have enough friction to basically bite in the inside. Ultimately, I made the decision that welding was going to be the best solution to tackle this trunk strut problem. Welding is going to offer the most secure and the most high strength permanent solution. versus all these little gadgets and tools that ultimately do not offer as long term of a solution and may just end up breaking eventually down the line. So I started looking around my hometown at shops and mechanics that do offer welding services to see which one can basically weld a nut into the hole so I can thread in the strut. So the first place I went to is called Williams Welding, designated weld shop. All this shop does is welding. It's run by one guy, an old guy. I can tell he was more in tune with American cars and motorcycles because when I drove in my Honda Civic, uh, he didn't even look like he wanted to do the job on my car in the first place. He had like a Harley parked outside, and he has like Chevy pickup trucks parked inside the garage. And so when I first showed him the problem on my trunk, he sounded like he didn't even want to do the job in the first place. Because the first solution that he offered me was to use this tool called the nutter, which is basically the rib nut tool, to compress a rib nut into the hole, and then it has threads on the inside, so it just works based off of friction and compression. Again, I didn't want to do the rib nut tool because I didn't think it would offer permanent solution as welding, because I was afraid that the rib nut was going to spin out because it's not a flush surface. Again, insisted that I wanted to do a weld job. To be honest, he kind of made it sound like it was going to be too much of a hassle for him to do such a small job like that, which I can understand. I mean, he's probably going to have to set up the tool, and then he's going to have to cover the glass with a weld blanket, and then cover the bottom with a weld blanket as well. At the end of the day, he offered me $100 just for a simple tack job. No prep, no paint, nothing, just ballpark around $100. So after hearing that option, I decided to check out another shop. This time I went to this other mechanic shop called Alameda Auto Body. They're an auto body shop that listed welding as one of its services online. So I drove to the shop. I had the technicians take a look at the car, and I wanted to get a quote for the weld job. And initially, they were going to charge me $300, which is yikes. But they said that the $300 will include the prep. They said that they're going to do some anti-corrosion spray, the weld, paint, and clear coat. And so basically, I was like, damn, that's a lot of money. So then I sat on it for a couple more days. I had to think about this for a sec. And then I went back to the Alameda Auto Body Shop to get a new quote without the paint, just pure weld. And for just a pure welding job, the new quote was going to be $167. At this point, I was set on choosing between the two different shops, Williams Welding and Alameda Auto Body. For Williams Welding, again, the guy said minimum prep, straight weld, and to be honest, it was a grumpy guy who didn't want to do the job in the first place and made it sound like a burden. The Alameda Auto Body Shop, prep work explained. They were willing to explain the prep work, willing to cover these sensitive areas, which was especially good because they said that they're going to use MIG welding, which does create a lot of splatter, but because they were going to put the weld blanket on, I didn't have as much of an issue with this. I would have preferred TIG welding, but they said MIG, so MIG is fine. So ultimately, I went with choosing Alameda Auto Body. And perhaps the biggest deciding factor in my decision was every time I went to the shop to ask the technicians a question, they were always happy to explain the process, and they reassured me with all the precautions because I was especially nervous that if they were to weld, the splatter would get onto the glass, and in the heat may crack the glass. And if it does, then we got an even bigger problem. And then over time, do some small talk, they eventually knew my hatch was a project slash family car. I'm pretty much a DIYer, mechanic slash car enthusiast. And an old car as it is, parts are getting scarce, so they knew exactly where I was coming from and they understood why I was a little bit nervous initially, but they reassured me with the prep that they were willing to include in the quote, and I felt more confident leaving my car with them. 2 hours later, I got the car back, and I was very happy with the job that they did. Not only did they weld the nut in for me and they made it flush with the surface of the trunk to match with the other side, and even better, they decided to paint it for me anyways to make the welds look nice at no extra cost. So I was very, very happy with the outcome and the extra service that they did. I learned a lot of new things in this particular project. One, deciding between which type of fastener I wanted to use to fasten the trunk strut onto the trunk, and which was best for my application. In my case, I knew welds would be best to hold the expansive force of the struts, and I didn't want to risk the riv nuts spinning out. So basically, the motto at the end of the day is to buy once, cry once, because I was willing to spend 160 bucks basically for a weld job versus 40 bucks for a cheap riv nut tool with the risk of it spinning out and then having to do it over and over again. Secondly, I learned value evaluation. Basically, which shop do I choose based on their services and pricing? In my case, I decided to go with Alameda Auto Body because they gave me the best price to value in my opinion. And at the end of the day, they even threw on the paint at no additional cost from the updated quote that they gave me. And I made a good decision with them ultimately in the end, and they made it look really nice. And with that, the trunk strut can now hold itself up. Now I have two very solid trunk struts, and it should last like that for a while, and the welds feel nice and sturdy. All in all, I felt very happy with this. And with that being said, we got a self-holding trunk, and I don't need to use my head anymore. So that's it. Thanks, guys. Bye.